This is a conversation with Byron Dempsey, the host of the Driven Young podcast. We talk about his story, creativity, perfectionism, and I ask him questions about podcasting. This podcast is sponsored by me. Go to joshjerryplays.com to see what I'm up to. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, man. I'm really excited.
Yeah. For starters, can you just tell me a little bit about your background? What got you into being the type of person that wanted to talk to people online and do interviews and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so when I graduated high school, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I was making movies since I was about 11 years old, just like fun movies with like my friends and stuff. And then I started monetizing that throughout high school, but I didn't really want to go to university because I couldn't see the value in film school. It looked like just a networking place. So I still went to film school like 2 nights a week, but then I just worked. I just worked part-time, and I got a job with a guy called Glenn Carlson, who's got quite a big, successful business helping other entrepreneurs. And I was kind of like, if you know Gary Vee, I was kind of like following him around, making videos to his social media. And as a result, because I was following him around, I got to learn from him for like a year straight just by following him. And over time, I took over his entire marketing funnel. And I just started realizing I'd learned so much in this year with him that I hadn't learned at school. And I was like, these seem like fundamental skills I should have been learning. Some basic finance stuff, some basic stuff around tax, communication skills. And I started bringing up this conversation with my friends and family. And then about a year later, I started to realize that everyone seemed to agree with me. Everyone agreed that what we learned at school wasn't really that applicable in the real world. And so I went, okay, this is clearly a problem. And then I was at a podcasting conference in 2018, and I actually spoke there about video. And I got to meet like Pat Flynn and some of these huge podcasters. I didn't even know who they were at the time. And that really opened up my brain to going, okay, wow, podcasting is a really legitimate thing. And at the time in 2018, it wasn't nowhere near as established as it was now. Like now, kind of everyone has a podcast. But back in 2018, it was definitely more people with like authority at a podcast. And yeah, I realized that if I do the podcasting strategy, I could video it, and then I can turn all that into content without me having to look down the barrel of the camera. So I can video it, turn it into content. I can leverage off experts, so I can cover any topic I want, because I can bring on experts in nutrition or finance or whatever it is, which means I can cover topics without me being like a egotistical, look, I know this. And yeah, that kind of led me to get to where I am today.
Awesome. With a lot of people that I talk to that get success in one place, or they choose to pick a particular direction, one of the hardest parts about it is you have to give up every other direction, at least temporarily. And it's one of the more painful things that we have to go through, like kind of that like initial sacrifice of all the other options. But I think that one of the parts that people don't realize is that on the farther end of it, once you've gone through the process, a lot of times the other things that you used to want to do, you become able to do them. So like you were talking about film, and I'm just curious, like, do you still have ambitions there? Do you want to pursue things in other aspects of film? And do you feel like what you're doing now is enabling that?
It's actually a really good question. I appreciate you asking that. So yeah, I think the cool thing about film for me was it was a creative outlet. And I definitely would say, especially at the point I'm at now, the content I create is not really creative. It's repetitive. It's how many videos have I made for TikTok now? Probably over 2,000. Like I can create 30 or 40 clips an episode. I now have an editor who does it for me. And so I think what I've actually just started, because we're in lockdown here in Australia, COVID's been a bit of a mess recently. We were all good until about a month ago. So I started a YouTube channel, and I've filmed my first video. And for me, that was really fun because I got to get really creative. And so, yeah, I definitely have ambitions to create documentaries and explore the education system through other means as I can grow. But it's the whole thing, Amazon started a bookstore, and now it's a, everything store. And so I'm starting as a podcast, and then I'm growing into lots of other things. So yeah, absolutely. I do think, even though I do want to keep doing film, I had to sacrifice for a few years to focus on the podcast and stuff. But now I'm at a point where I can start to get a bit more creative and have a bit more freedom with that. And I'm starting to go, well, now I've got the TikTok following, I can create TikTok content and I can push that to YouTube and blah, 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 blah. So I would say yes, definitely now I am starting to get more creative with film.
I really believe in that journey. And I believe in like the small iteration of it. I keep coming back to Buffy the Vampire Slayer for some reason. You know it?
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah. So, like Joss Whedon, brilliant director, has directed so many different things, and the way I always bring him up is like he directed, Avengers,
Mm.
which I mean, Avengers is like, say what you want about it. Doesn't matter if you're a fan or not. It's pretty much the height of movie production. Like,
Yeah.
like whatever you think about acting, script, blah blah, whatever. In terms of just straight up movie production, I mean, it's pretty much the best Earth has done.
I mean, Robert Downey Jr. was 50 million just for him.
Yeah, it's just incredible what happened, and like just all of the quality of the work that went into it, and like costume and visual effects, and just all of these things, just absurdly high end. And it came from the guy that made a long running TV show about a little teenage cheerleader that told campy jokes and staked monsters that you could see the zipper on with tent stakes. And it's like, I really think it's important to know that he was able to do the Avengers because of that, not in spite of it. And the way I think of it is like, that was an absurd workload. Like any television show is an absurd workload, right? Because it's like just the episodic nature of it. Like you have to keep delivering, and you have to create so much to do that. And like every week there's a new demand, and every week you're going to run into a problem. Something's not going to work on set. There's going to be a problem creatively somewhere. And yet you still have to deliver it, right? So it's kind of like, I guess, journalism in some degree, in some ways, where it's like, the paper has to get out, right? And that creates a certain type of person, I believe. And that type of person, when they go to do something like, say, the Avengers, there's a whole bunch of elements of the process of making the movie that are, I don't know, they're 100 times more adept at than somebody who didn't go through that type of grind, didn't go through that type of process. And I really believe in sort of like finding something that you can create a lot of, and then just slowly turning it into something, right? And I mean, I don't know if, say, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if they had the plot planned out, or if they knew how it was going to end. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they did have it planned, maybe they didn't. But I'm sure that even if they did, the way it ended up was a result of what they did. Like the quality, the drama, the like, and in some ways it did increase in production quality what they did. But then, the next show that he did, was better because of what he did there. And it's very, like, I think, step-by-step process.
You have to start somewhere. That's it. You have to start somewhere. I think a lot of people, we always look at Joss Whedon and go, oh, how did he, start? I want to direct the Avengers movie. I want to do that sort of stuff. But they never go, I want to direct a Buffy the Vampire, right? Because you have to start somewhere. And I agree, that would have been a stepping stone to get him to another stepping stone, which led to probably 20 more stepping stones before eventually he got Avengers. And I mean, that's kind of like the episodic thing is the same with podcasts, right? 85% of podcasts don't make it past 7 episodes. So if you've got a podcast and you're 7 episodes in, you're already in the top, 15% of podcasters. There's, I think there's over 1 million podcasts now. Not many of them are active. So I think where you can really get success, especially in this kind of new modern world, is repetition and just putting in the reps and just continually doing it day in, day out. For me, like, I do all my podcast interviews in person, which is way more work. I've got to organize them to drive out to me. I've got to set up the meeting room and the studio. It means I have access to way less people, but that's how I've grown my account on TikTok. It's all through in-person content, and that's how I grow it. And so I've done that every week for the past, I guess, 2 years. And it's really been an interesting learning lesson for me to be continually doing that, just week in, week out. And who knows, in 10 years, maybe I'll have my Avenger equivalent, whatever it is. But yeah, I think you just got to start somewhere, start small, and build from that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm shocked at the power of it. Every time I start exploring that, there's TikTok accounts that I find somebody that's doing animation, and it's like there's the cleverest stuff where it's like somebody will take a pigeon that's like just eating some grain on the ground and like animate like a purse wrapped or hanging from one pigeon's neck, so it has like this little human element, and then something else hanging from another pigeon's neck, and then they'll voice over some sort of dialogue on the thing, and it turns into this cute, hilarious, delightful little piece of entertainment. And it's like, animation is so hard, it takes so long, and that minimum necessary effort that person was putting was so much more effective than somebody that went through a process of trying to create a masterpiece, right? They just scribbled these couple of marks to show their message, and it's like, you can do that consistently, and I think that's the big part, is like, have you run into this thing? So I'm a big perfectionist. That was my whole life struggle. It still is my whole life struggle, probably. Do you run into this thing where it's like you start doing the thing you think you want to do versus the thing that you can do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think before I go into that, I did want to comment on the perfectionist thing, because it's not something I struggle with. I'm almost the opposite, to the point where it's like a detriment.
Really?
Yeah, like small mistakes, unnecessary mistakes. And I'm not sure why, but I had one of my best mates. He's a musician, and I had him on the podcast, and he was talking about how he suffered from perfectionist, and his latest album's called an inspiring imperfectionist. And what he did was he was making songs and stuff, but then he moved to Europe and he lived in Paris for about 2 to 3 years. And he didn't release a single song. He wouldn't go to parties because he'd be in his bedroom mixing and working on new albums and stuff. And he was just too scared to release a song, because he was like, I want to release a song and I want it to change my life. And he was caught up in perfectionism. And then what he did is, when he came back to Australia and his lockdown first hit, this is when COVID very first hit, he said, you know what? This TikTok thing is, Gary Vee said something about TikTok. He saw a video, he was like, all right, I'll check out this TikTok thing. And so he saw it and he went, I'm going to make a song a day and I'm going to post it on TikTok for 60 days straight. And that's what he did. So for 60 days straight, he created like a, 30-second song. He posted it on TikTok. And then, he just hit 100,000 followers recently. And his voice has gotten way better because he sings every single day. He uses TikTok as like a testing market. We called it like musical Darwinism. So it's like survival of the fittest. Whichever song doesn't perform, he won't work on. But if he gets a viral video and people love this, then he'll make a full version. So that was a really interesting podcast when it came to perfectionism, because I think a lot of people suffer from it. And I would say you've probably done something similar on your TikTok, haven't you? Like, you've just been like, all right, I just need to put out content.
Yes. And what's funny is, I mean, my previous life was as a musician. And that was my story. I mean, what you just described is like, that was, I mean, it's a perennial artist dilemma. Is you get stuck in the perfectionism and you get mired in it to the point that you can't get past it. And that was my major hangup, was the perfectionism. I struggled with it tremendously. And yes, I started to learn the lessons. I started to learn how to break out of it, different methods. I didn't, but like, whatever you're the most skilled at, also your worst habits are the most ingrained. So that was actually like the place where it was the hardest for me to break my perfectionism. So I ended up breaking it faster in sort of, let's call it the thought category, where I started posting the type of content that I do today. I'm able to break through those barriers much faster in that area, because that's not where I spent, over a decade, working and studying. And slowly, what's interesting is I can feel it affecting my artistic creation as well, because I still make stuff But I can feel learning in one place impacting learning in another. And that's actually something we could talk about. Have you had many experiences with that where you like learn one thing over here and then see how it applies in all the other places?
Absolutely. I mean, my podcast, like I am my ideal listener. I learn so much by doing episodes. Sure, it's for my listeners, but also I learn a lot just as a host. And it's funny how often I'll have a really cool interview because not only do I do the interview, but then I then edit the podcast and then I often listen back to it in the car just to like tweak to so I can improve and see how it went. So I'll listen to each of my episode like 3 times essentially. And so sometimes after an episode, I'll hear something the guest said and I'll be like, that's so good. And then I'll start implementing that. Or I'll start talking about it in the next episode. And because I'm doing a lot of presenting now, someone will say a story. Like, I'm probably going to use your Buffy the Vampire story. I'm probably going to start using that when it comes to the whole Joss Whedon thing. I've already put that in my bank. And so, yeah, I do definitely see, and the whole perfectionist, like even though I'm not a perfectionist, having that conversation with Dale, my musician mate, that again got me, okay, that's it. You've just got to be prolific. You've just got to consistently be putting out content, and that's how you get better. Like, I'm not sure if you've heard of that experiment with the pots. I can't remember if it was Tim Ferriss or someone, but he had a class, let's say he had a classroom, and he split the class up into 2 groups, and he said, I want you to make an incredible pot, like, pottery. And he said, this group A, you're going to make 100 pots and you're going to give me your best one. Group B, you're going to spend the entire week on one perfect pot. And come the end of the week, guess who had the better pot? Group A, because they had made so many pots, they made mistake after mistake after mistake. By the time they got to the 99th pot, they could just bang out an incredible one. And the lesson there was that, like, just by doing you're going to learn and learn and learn and learn, and then you'll get better, rather than getting all focused on one perfect thing.
Yeah, I think one of the most painful elements of accepting this process for a perfectionist is they're afraid that they're not going to be working towards perfection because they still want it, right? They still want the masterpiece. They still want the big, great, good thing. So I keep coming back to saying, like, a lot of people are now saying quantity over quantity, that kind of a thing. But I really think the words are important in this case, where I try to always say quantity enables quality.
Yeah, that's good.
Because you have to go with somebody's desires, right? And this goes to like the Ira Glass quote that I love so much. It's too long for me to like remember and recite, but I'll do a butcher summary of it. Is something along the lines of like the problem with like learning a skill or an art form is you get into it because you have good taste, and when you go to actually create, you're obviously not going to be any good at it because you don't know anything. You're new to it. But you have good taste. That's what got you in. So the difference between like your perception of that art form and your capability is more extreme than anybody else. So you're like particularly tortured by it. It's particularly painful. And then to solve that, you have to have an element of faith in the process where you just go and do the work, and doing the work results in the gaining of the skill. But I think one of the key elements that we don't communicate enough for somebody that's perfectionist minded is that the quantity enables the quality, where it's like, yes, the goal is still quality. Like let's go with what you desire here. I know you want to create the great form of art or whatever. Like, so let's keep that your goal, but realize that the fastest way to get there is through quantity.
Yeah. And I think TikTok is such a great example of that. Like, maybe some people can. I just don't think you can be a perfectionist on TikTok unless you're creating, like, you've got a whole team or something. I can't see an account growing off, 3 or 4 videos, which take you a month each. Maybe. But majority of people, you've really just got to be consistent, even if it's only 1 post a week or something. Because you put a lot of time into that, but you've got to be consistent. And I think TikTok is such a great example of that. If you go back to people's first clip and then look at their most recent one, because of the amount of content they put out, you can see the drastic improvement. You can see that any of my friends, my content, almost anyone's content. I'm sure if I scroll back through your account and look at your first video, it'd be nowhere near as good as your latest ones. And that's just through quantity. That's just through doing it. Because as you mentioned, by putting out quantity, by putting out pieces of content, that's how you can become better at what you actually want to do. So it's almost like if you are a perfectionist, that's a mindset you need to adopt.
Yeah, I better like go back and delete a couple videos before I release this podcast.
Yeah.
Now that you've
Now
said
people are
that.
going to go back.
But so I mean that's my neuroses. Let's talk about yours because mine was so much fun. So I lean in this perfectionist direction, and with that comes certain flaws and weaknesses that I have to push through. Where do you lean, and what does that result in? What problems does that result in for you?
Yeah, well, I think for me, when I first got my job with Glenn, as I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, my KPI, so to speak, was 4 videos a week. I had to create 4 videos a week. I can now do that in like an hour. But that was my original thing. I put a lot of work into them. TikTok didn't exist at the time. This was all Facebook and Instagram. And they were like square videos with headlines and captions and stuff. And I had no format, no structure. I was manually doing my subtitles on Adobe After Effects. It's a mess. But what I came to realize through that was the amount of spelling mistakes I would make, which would cause to constant reviews. And tiny little details I'd miss here and there really impacted the flow of things. And so after doing more research on myself, and I've taken a few of those, personality tests and stuff, I think I'm very much a big picture person. I love looking into the vision and coming up with ideas, but I'm not very detail oriented. So for me, like I'm looking to hire someone as like an assistant or like someone to help me out with stuff. I want to hire someone who's detail orientated, someone who can counter what I'm not good at. And like for me, it doesn't bother me too much, especially now that I don't have any clients. I just do my own content. Like I make spelling mistakes all the time in my podcast, but I just can't afford to go through every single caption and check it. It's just too time consuming, and I'm totally okay with that. But when I had clients and I was doing work for clients, they weren't okay with that. And I had to say to them, I was like, look, I can't really, you have to pay me more if you want me to check the spelling. Like that's so much work when you're looking at the amount of content I'm producing. So I think it's definitely gotten a lot of people angry. When I was working with clients, it definitely was not the best. I'd just rather get something out there and work on the next project. And I can't explain why. It's just who I am. And so ever since I've been my own boss and I've got rid of all my other clients, I'm just doing my own content, it's been fine. But when I was working with other people and working on behalf of other people, it was not the best, because a lot of people are micromanagers or perfectionists themselves. And so when they see a piece of content, especially if they're speaking or it's their face and there's a little mistake, they're not happy. And I'm just like, look, you've just got to get over that. You've just got to start putting out content. You've just got to start doing it. But, it's hard for them to listen. So that was kind of my experience analyzing like the antithesis of being a perfectionist.
So when you've got a weakness, what do you do? Do you try to shore it up and fix it, or do you go around it?
In that example, I tried to fix it, as in I would often outsource my spell checking to like my friends or someone, or like I'd bring in a classic example with editing, right? Is whenever you're editing on a big project, and I've done quite a few big projects, you've got to just step away from it and get other people's point of view, because you're so stuck in it. You can't see it because you've been looking at it for like 10 hours straight. And so I'd bring my mum in, I'd bring my friends in, I'd send it to them. I'd say, what do you think of this? Hey, can you check this for spelling mistakes? Hey, can you check all this stuff? So I would create systems that would allow less mistakes to happen, and just find ways around it. And so I think systems is a big part. Like I could talk about systems for a while, but systems is the reason I'm able to create so much content. It's all through systems that I've created. It's especially once you become an entrepreneur or a content creator or whatever it is, you're freelancing, systems will change your life when it comes to output and what you can achieve.
Oh, I love systems. Let's do it. What are some of your favorite systems?
Well, for me, like I've got such a process of the podcast. And it's taken me ages to get there, but it's taken me, this is 2 years of trial and error in terms of the platform I use. I've templated everything. I've got foldering templates. I've got Adobe Premiere as a template. I've created my own template within that. When I use my multicam to set up the two cameras and stuff, that's all templated. My whole TikTok strategy is now templated. I mark every point while I'm editing it, then I give it to my editor. He strips the content into one timeline. We then upload that one timeline as an MP3 file to Otter.ai. That converts it to a caption. We upload the caption, which gives us subtitles. We edit the subtitles, blah, 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 blah. So it's like a whole step process, which allows me not to automate, but to make it a lot easier, to make the whole thing easier. And then I use Google Drive, which syncs to my editor, who uses that, and it's all synced and everything. So it's just, once it's going, it's just satisfying. So that's my main systems in terms of content creation. But, you know, there's lots of other things in life which are systems. What about you? What do you use for your like flow?
So I'm getting there. I use the Riverside, what we're on right now, for filming, and that's made it a lot easier than trying to, you know, use any fancy setup. And then I've gotten an editor to work inside of Descript.com, which that is just, oh my God, it's like I want to, like, you know, punch anybody that says that that's not like a world changing technology. That thing blew my mind.
I haven't used it yet, but I've looked into it because it doesn't really apply to my podcast. But when I saw it, I was like, holy crap. Like, you can cut out like words and it won't replace it with like your voice or something.
Yeah, it's incredible. And you can like the ease of cutting clips, right? You know, you can cut clips by looking at an article instead of, you know, doing it by cutting video, right? So it's an astonishing software. Descript, hire me to plug your platform, because they're great. What did you say your transcription software was?
Otter.ai.
I feel like I've heard of it, but how do you like it?
Yeah, well, once again, that's a whole system within itself. So my whole TikTok strategy was, I'm sure you've experienced it, but my experience with TikTok is it's not you get followers, get followers, get followers, get followers, get followers. It's you get a lot of followers and it dips, and then you get a lot and then it dips. And it's very much, yeah, you've got consistent growth. But there was a moment at the beginning of this year when I didn't gain any followers for like a week, which was, I'm not in this for followers, but like, I was like, what the hell is going on?
We still like them.
And considering the 2 weeks before, I was gaining about 1,000 followers a day. I was like, how is this even possible? How can the drop be so drastic? And so I was like, okay, let's try innovate my content. And subtitles was definitely popping up. So I was like, there's no way I can subtitle every single video. That's just way too much work. It's just not sustainable. But then I went, okay, how can I make this work? And I realized a strategy where I figured out what text TikTok uses when you use it on the phone. And I figured out the exact font and how many lines it was. And so I was able to mimic that using Otter.ai and Premiere. And so on Otter.ai, when you export it as a file, you can actually say, I want 4 lines, each line 26 words max. And so it'll export it like that. And then I upload it in Premiere. I change it to the font. I put the correct drop shadow behind it. I upload it to where I think it would fit. And so my captions look like I type it in manually on TikTok, but really I do it at scale in the editing software.
For real?
Yeah, yeah.
You're mimicking TikTok like auto captions.
Yeah. Oh, not the auto caption.
Or not auto. I mean, they're caption, but they're captioning software. That's amazing.
It took me a while to figure out, and because my whole strategy with the podcast has always been, how do I make this look like it belongs on TikTok? So I make it full screen. I don't add any like external title or header. I just use a TikTok font. I try and make it look like it looks as native as possible. Otherwise, it looks like an ad, and people will swipe.
Yeah. Man, that's amazing. That's brilliant. Brilliant idea.
Thank you. Yeah, it took me ages, honestly. It took me ages just to figure out what font they use. It's Proxima semi-bold, by the way, if anyone's curious.
Can I try this?
Yeah. It's just Proxima semi-bold. And then, I just whack it on Otter.ai. I do 26 words per line. I do 4 lines. So if you look at my account, which is Byron Dempsey, you'll just see what the captions look like. But now that TikTok's introduced auto captions, maybe I'll switch to that. But I don't even have that feature yet. So I'll see what happens when that comes out.
Well, that's a great piece of thinking. I love it. And like little things like that pay off incredibly. Like I had this one's much smaller than that. Geez, that's brilliant. I love it. But like I had one idea pop into my head that saved me hours upon hours, which is like how to find mutual connections on TikTok, which is it's really quite simple. Is if you have a large number of followers, it's kind of hard to sort through them, but what you can do is you can go find somebody that you find interesting and then figure out who they follow and then see if there's any mutual followers between those.
Hold on. Okay, let me have a look at this. So I'll go to your profile because this is something that I'm quite interested in. Because I wish that when I clicked on my followers, it had like the because I don't know if you notice when you're scrolling through your For You page, but now it pops up and it says someone who follows you. And so that happens to me quite a bit. And I'm like, oh, this person follows me. I had no idea. And I'm like, I wish I knew that. So you go into people you admire, you click on their followers, and it shows mutuals.
Yeah, well, it just has the option to follow or follow back. And if it says follow back, then you know it's a potential addition to your network.
There's one on your account. I see Dr. Karana, Dr. Karana, Karan Raj. Yeah, he follows me. I'm sort of scrolling through your account. Oh, there's another one. We've got a few.
Yeah. So it's a very cool little trick.
Yeah, there you go. That is a cool trick.
And it's like that saves hours, and just having little things like that in place are amazing. And I'm very slow to set them up, but every single one like takes a massive piece of workload off the back. And like I wanted to point, like, a lot of people think about doing the kind of stuff that you and I are doing right now, and a lot of people it's very hard to put it in perspective when you're not doing it. And I'm not trying to paint the picture that it's a lot of work. Well, I am. I'm trying to paint the picture that it's a lot of work and you can do it, that kind of a thing. So I just for one example, like you were talking about your setup, and one of the things you mentioned was file naming, right? You had a system of organizing the files. Like I want to point out, like, that can take days, weeks of work to get nailed down for somebody. Like, I mean, sometimes it can be very easy, but like if you have like a complex system of files, it can take a really long time just to do that one step. And if you don't know that, you get to that step and you're like, oh, this is a mess. I can't, I should stop. Like, I must be missing something. I must be an idiot. No, that's just how much work it is. But when you know, like, you can go ahead and do it, and it's very doable.
I think for me, the one thing I learned at film school when I did like a diploma in editing, it was, as I mentioned, 2 nights a week. It was pretty chill. It was only 6 months. The one thing I didn't really learn much. The one thing I learned was the importance of structuring your folders. So in the movies, you have an assistant editor and an editor. The job of the assistant editor is to folder everything, to name everything, to color code everything, to organize all the music, to organize everything. It's the worst job. The editor gets to jump in, have everything sit in front of him, and just start editing. And so, I mean, you got to cut your teeth, right? So for me, I was like, okay, that's interesting. And as you mentioned, I spent months and months building out my folder structure. Not 40 hours a week, but just slowly tweaking it over months and months to the point where I've got it now. It is so important. And it's so important if you want to be a legit content creator, because I'm constantly going back and referencing clips, and I'm going back and opening old files. Now, most people, when they go back and open an old file, they've probably got their footage scattered everywhere. So it's not linking, it's messy. I keep any project I'm working on, I have a folder here. If I open up that folder, every single piece of footage is in this folder, so I can link it to here. And it's in Google Drive, and it's also backed up on a hard drive. So that's where I guess having my experience in video really helped me as a content creator, because I've been doing that for years. But yeah, it's something as simple as a folding structure will make your life and everything so much easier.
So what's been your experience on TikTok so far? I find TikTok to be a fascinating place. What do you think about it?
It's incredibly fascinating. It's very much a love-hate relationship. I don't know if that's the same with you, like in terms of how toxic the comments can be and how much hate is spewed on the platform. But also it's an incredible platform in terms of organic growth. Like I'm big on it, especially in Australia. Like I think I just got given my own TikTok like manager. So he emailed me. He said I'm the top 20 educational creators in Australia, and I'm not that big. So Australia is like really small in terms of like content creators, and it's also a lot more difficult to grow here because our audience is, you know, 1/100th of the size. Like even then, I'm pretty sure 50% of my audience is US. Even though all my content's kind of not targeting Australians, but quite Australian based. So yeah, it's been an incredible platform. I got on it during lockdown, when lockdown first hit last year. So I'm actually about to hit my 1 year anniversary, I think, on the platform. And yeah, it's just been an incredible opportunity for me. All my listeners come from TikTok, essentially. I get people reaching out to me every week and they say, "Hey Byron, I found you on TikTok. I love the podcast." So, you know, we've just crossed 400,000 downloads on the podcast, and it's almost all attributed to TikTok. Because my podcast is for young people, most young people aren't even listening to podcasts yet. So how do you get an audience of young people when they're not even on the platform? The answer was TikTok. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was what, you know, put out content to where they are and use that as a funnel. I think if you want to be successful in this world, TikTok cannot be your only platform. It has to be a vehicle to something else. It has to be a vehicle to your podcast, to your YouTube channel, to your Instagram, or to your whatever it is, because it's just, you've got to be, unlike a YouTube channel, when your views you constantly get views on all your other videos. I find if I stop for a week, my views go down. So yeah, it's been an incredible platform. I love it, but also something I've noticed, and I'd actually love your opinion on this because it's rare I talk to someone with a similar following. Obviously, you're even bigger than me. I noticed once I hit about 250,000 followers, there was a shift. And I was no longer like an underdog everyday guy with a podcast. I was now established. Like most people in Australia have seen my podcast. And as a result, people were way more savage in the comments because I think they didn't see me as a person anymore. I was more set up. And so the comments just switched to like people were like being way more aggressive. They were like calling me out and all this stuff. And it was a really interesting thing for me to notice.
So, I mean, part of this is like a fundamental aspect of psychology, right? So, I mean, I could go and do the whole crabs in the bucket story, where it's like, you know, the crabs are self-regulating creatures where if you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket, one crab tries to get out, the other crabs will actually pull them back down because they like keep everybody at the same level. So you actually don't have to put a top on top of crabs, and that's like a common story that people tell to talk about how, like, you know, when somebody starts to get success, other people go and try to pull them down. I think that happens on a family level and on a small close-knit community level. I think that does kind of happen, you know, if you're like stuck in a bad neighborhood and all the guys around you that you know or like, you know, have a particular lifestyle, and you go and try and, you know, push past that and go to something else, they're going to be like, they're going to check you, right? And they're going to be like, "Hey man, like go be like us," you know. But there's another thing that happens that's I think a fundamental psychological trait, which is testing, right? So when somebody gets to a certain level of importance, like whether they want to be or not, they're leaders. Because leadership doesn't come just from like taking it on. It comes from symbolism and just like whatever symbol you represent by the position that you've attained. So if you've reached a certain level of success, there's an element of like, okay, so I might go to this guy to tell me what to do. I might go to this guy for information of what I need to do. And it doesn't even have to be educational content. This could be, you know, somebody that's like shooting lifestyle video of him like driving Lamborghinis and Ferraris around, right? It doesn't matter. It's just a sort of like a status oriented thing. And the thing is we want the best information we can possibly get. We want information that is flawless, preferably. And the reason why we want that is very simple, because anything less than flawless would require more calories. Like we'd have to think it through, and we'd have to solve it. But if the information is perfect, we don't have to think about it. Okay, cool, done. And I think that this actually factors into how people treat people that have gotten a certain amount of following online, because what people do with people in a position of significance is we test them. We go, hey, do you know what you're talking about? And then we'll start to challenge them in different ways. We'll be more bold in presenting a counter view, because, well, okay, so this person is presenting a view that's slightly different than mine, and when you were, of less social importance, let's say, for example, I didn't need to pay attention to you. I could have just considered that I'm right and that's the way it is. But, okay, if you have this high level of social importance and you're saying a view that's different than mine, crap. Now I have to figure out if my view is right or your view is right. So I'm going to hurl my view at you as hard as I can to see if it breaks you. And if it breaks you, then I'll keep my view because that'll save me calories. And I think that's one of the fundamental behaviors that people take on. The testing behavior is something that everybody does. You walk into a new crowd of people that you're going to make friends with, and they're going to test you, right? They're going to check, oh, can he take a joke? Oh, is he...
Whether it's consciously or subconsciously, they'll test you.
Yeah. They don't know they're doing it most of the time. I'd say 90% of the time we don't know we're testing somebody, but we're still gonna do it because we don't want somebody in our club that's gonna take us down, right? And the higher profile you are, the higher stakes if you're providing information that is going to, mislead us or take us down. So we're going to try to take you down to see if you come down. And if you come down, great, we'll ignore you. If you don't, oh, okay, maybe there's something there. So that's one of my viewpoints on a psychological element of why, maybe when you get a larger following, people start to maybe behave a little bit differently.
I think it's completely true. It makes so much sense, and it's hard because you can't really argue with them, can you? I'm not gonna just argue with them in the comments. Maybe I'll respond once, but you can't have a back and forth. And I guess the downside of my strategy, so the podcasting strategy is amazing. It means I never have to come up with content. It just happens organically through the podcast, and I just cut it out and I post it. I have unlimited content. I can post 3-4 times a day if I wanted to. Realistically, I could post 10 times a day. I just don't have that put in place, and I don't want to annoy people. But I have a kind of unlimited content. The downside of it is you throw people into a section of conversation where they have no context, which often causes a lot of hate and a lot of people attacking you. It's well, if they had the context beforehand, they would understand, I did talk about that. We did talk about all this stuff. They'll be like, what about this? Well, it's actually in the next 3 seconds if you listen to the episode. And I get it. I don't expect everyone to go listen to my full podcast, but that is a downside of the strategy, to the point where I actually have, I have a second podcast, and it's on 290,000 followers on TikTok. So it's a second account and a second podcast, and it's all around sexual assault and consent, and it's education for young people. And we had a video that went, my biggest video ever, 20 million views. It went mega viral, and it got, because it was out of context, a lot of people took it the wrong way, and it just got out of control. I had to delete it. I made a video kind of clarifying what happened. I apologize. And it was messing with my mental health, because I had so many people duetting this video. This video was up for 2 months. We were getting duets every single day for 2 months. I had hundreds and hundreds of duets, and they were all calling us rapists and pedophiles, which was just such a cut. It was such a cut, because I was I'm trying to actually, help people out there, and now I'm getting thrown back this way. And so I did this video summarizing, what was going on and stuff. But a big reason people took that a negative way was because they had no context to the episode and to what we were talking about, and they just got angry. And so that is definitely the downside of my strategy with the podcasting thing, for sure.
Yeah, context is a weird one, because the reality is, and this is something that I've explored and talked about a lot in the art world, is context is something that can never be completely provided. At a certain point, you have to draw a line, and so it's like, for example, like, okay, I want to create a piece of art. Let's say, I want to create a piece of art that exemplifies this feeling. Okay, cool. Oh, but wait a second. So this feeling would have to happen because of this thing right here. Oh, but why would that happen? Well, it happens because of this thing over here. And you start trying to like connect the dots because you want to create more meaning, right? You want to make this thing more important. But the problem is the full extrapolation of that is the universe. Because that's the ultimate context, right? And I agree. It's a tricky problem. But I think there's also a strength in leaving aside context. So there's a funny story of Bob Dylan. Somebody walked up to Bob Dylan and said, "Oh, Mr. Dylan, I'm such a fan of your work. I have so much respect for the things that you've done. I just have one question." And Bob Dylan's like, "What's your question?" He's like, I gotta ask, what does blowing in the wind mean? It's like Bob Dylan's like biggest line, right? And Bob Dylan, bless his heart, said the right thing, which was, means everything's blowing in the wind, man. In other words, find your own meaning, right?
It's your own interpretation.
Yeah. And it's like, that's the line you have to sort of straddle, is like, when do you leave something open to interpretation? Or even more interesting, when do you leave something open-ended so that somebody can plug in their own story to it, versus when do you try to create a complete package? And I think that is one of those like miraculously subtle things that a human has to learn over time, because it has to do with like having a finger on the pulse of your own culture, right? Because you need to know, like, how do you, like, all right, this is maybe going to overstep bounds, not in the context of your personal beliefs, but just in the fact that, you're leaving off a piece of context that is going to make people jump to too many conclusions, that it's going to make too much trouble, right? And then other times it's like, you don't want to go too far in the other direction where you find a complete package, because the complete package for a lot of people is actually unsatisfying, right? It's weird, but it is.
It's your own interpretation.
Yeah. And it's like, that's the line you have to sort of straddle, is like, when do you leave something open to interpretation? Or even more interesting, when do you leave something open-ended so that somebody can plug in their own story to it, versus when do you try to create a complete package? And I think that is one of those like miraculously subtle things that a human has to learn over time, because it has to do with like having a finger on the pulse of your own culture, right? Because you need to know, like, how do you, like, all right, this is maybe going to overstep bounds, not in the context of your personal beliefs, but just in the fact that, you're leaving off a piece of context that is going to make people jump to too many conclusions, that it's going to make too much trouble, right? And then other times it's like, you don't want to go too far in the other direction where you find a complete package, because the complete package for a lot of people is actually unsatisfying, right? It's weird, but it is.
I think a sign of an intelligent person is someone who can question everything, or question and make their own interpretation. Like, I encourage my listeners, like, don't listen to just one person. Take information from lots of people, take information from my podcast, and apply it to your own life as you wish. You really, if you just listen to one person and just did exactly what they say, their life is different to yours. So you've really got to, the books you read, the podcasts you listen to, you've got to take it and apply it to your own life, which, to me sounds obvious, but I think a lot of people don't do that.
Oh, it's not obvious at all. It's not obvious at all. Yeah. And I get that as well, because once you know it, it feels obvious. It feels so obvious, but many people do not. That's like hardly even crossing the mind, right? And I think a lot about how advice itself is contextual, right? So one thing that's not factored in nearly enough is the fact that any given piece of mainstream advice is going to be oriented around whatever the majority psychology is of those people. So the example that I go to for this is the advice to go find your niche, right? So go find your niche is great advice for a specific set of people. For another set of people, it actually kind of complicates the matters. So if you lean in the direction of slightly less creative, but more industrious, personality-wise, then having a niche feels like a godsend. Because somebody says, use red and blue. Don't worry about anything else. Now go to town. Go make stuff. And you go, oh my God, I can just go make stuff and I use red and blue and that's fine. It's like, oh, thank you. That's a niche, right? But you take somebody that's highly creative. Well, part of what a creative person does is actually create niches. So like that's the nature of a creative's mind. So if you tell a creative, go use red and blue and nothing else, and they're not ready to use red and blue and nothing else, it will melt their brains. I know this because I'm a highly creative individual. Like, I lean in that direction personality-wise. And that's the minority of the population, right? So the majority of the advice right now is niche. The minority population, though, needs a different set of advice. And I'm not saying that niching can't work for creatives. It absolutely can.
Of course. I think it's more creatives don't need to niche, but have guidelines. For example, my mum just commissioned a artwork and she said, I want you to paint this specific bird and you've kind of got creative freedom to do everything else. So she wasn't stuck. She had so much creative freedom within this bubble of guidelines she was given. And she got to use whatever colors she wanted. She got to make it look pretty. She could get really creative, but she just had to paint a bird. And so I think that's not a niche, but it's kind of like a framework or guidelines to fit within.
Yes. So we're kind of bouncing from the original thing we were talking about context, but yeah, the idea here was that, like, if you take that advice of niching in the context of personality, it makes so much more sense to understand what the idea of a niche is for. So it's like, for somebody that's less creative, maybe you give them a creativity-based niche, as in you use these colors, you use these designs, etc., etc. For somebody that leans more towards creativity, you might want to say niche according to logistics, where it's like it has to be 3 minutes long, it has to like have these set of, like, here's the rocks and sticks that you can play with, that kind of a thing. But you're free to do whatever you want. But I mean, since we're on this, what are your thoughts on niching? I'd love to hear it.
I'm actually quite passionate about niching, especially because I constantly get people asking me advice for podcasting and how to start a podcast and stuff. And I always just say, you have to niche a podcast. You have to figure out what makes you different from every other personal development podcast out there. What makes you different from every other person just randomly starting a podcast? For example, I cover finance, nutrition, anything, health. I told you I did a whole podcast on sexual assault. I cover any topic, but I niche via my audience. So my audience is 15 to 22. I niche for young people. And so whenever I'm talking with someone, I figure out, what would a 16-year-old be thinking right now? If you say a term that I understand, but I wouldn't have understood when I'm 16, I'll literally interrupt you and I'll say, can you just explain what you mean by that? For example, I love talking about opportunity cost. And so opportunity cost is such a good thing when we're talking about going to university or college or whatever. And I bring it up all the time. But when I first brought it up on the podcast, I said, actually, can you just explain what opportunity cost is? Because I know a 16-year-old doesn't know what we're talking about. And if we bring up that term, they're going to lose interest because they don't know what we're talking about. So I niche via audience. if you're doing a podcast, I think you need to niche, whatever your niche is, right? But just doing a broad podcast, just two bros talking or just some random guy starting a podcast, you need to figure out what is your difference. Why are people going to listen to you and not someone else? Look, if you're already an established personality, sure, maybe you can start a podcast. But it's so competitive and it's so washed, I do believe, heavily in niching. But I love your point about creatives. You don't want to niche a creative where they're trapped. You want to give them that freedom. And as a listener, you've got to figure out, what am I? Am I a creative or am I more analytical? And that's where self-awareness comes in, figuring out who you are, how you work best, and how can you apply certain things to your life so that it'll best suit you and the people around you.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the way you're approaching it, which is you're saying that the game is much more subtle than you think. Is like when somebody looks at niching, they tend to look at it initially as like these couple of boxes. It's like, no, it doesn't have to be those couple of boxes. It's like, maybe you're a painter that's super into wine and strawberries and you raise chickens. That's a great YouTube channel.
Honestly, that's the beauty of the world we're in right now. You can literally create content and make money doing anything you want if you're savvy enough and you have the drive. It's not going to be instant. It might take you a year or two of growing, but you can make money doing the most bizarre, random things. And I find that so exciting.
I found it interesting when I realized that there was I think it was, Chinese creator that she did content of just like traditional Chinese lifestyle. And like I first saw her on TikTok and had, big following there, and then checked her out on YouTube and huge following there. But apparently she's an even bigger star in China on their specific platforms. And she's won like national medals for like, being a symbol of, the traditional Chinese lifestyle, like that kind of stuff, which is like, she's just gone and done the thing that she wanted to some degree, and it's like now you're getting national medals for it.
That's interesting. I feel like it could almost be dangerous for her if she's representing Chinese culture internationally. I'm sure the government would want to get their input for how they're being represented. So that's very interesting.
I'll admit that thought was worming its way into my mind as well. I was trying to avoid it at all costs, but it's there. It's a little scary. Yeah,
it is. I mean, I don't even know what's going on in China, but some of the stuff you hear about like the technology they have, and it's like, it's crazy what they're achieving over there, especially because Australia is very much a horse and carriage to China. So wherever China goes, we kind of economically follow, because we rely a lot on their imports and exports. So, and I think we're trying to get out of that reliance, because it's, becoming a bit too like, wow, we're so reliant on one country. We shouldn't be that reliant. But if you look at where we're located in the world, we're like an island in the middle of nowhere. Exporting from America is a 4-day boat trip, as opposed to in America where you can just go around the corner to all these other countries. But that's a whole other conversation.
Oh, but I agree. It's a bit terrifying. They are a force to be reckoned with. It's incredible what they've done in just a couple of decades. I saw a video of Ray Dalio, who talked about going to China. He went to China when there wasn't a stock market, and he essentially like helped them make a stock market. I think they had one previously, but it had gotten shut down due to like a civil war or something, and there just wasn't one, and for years. And this was when China was really struggling, and he helped them like start up a stock market, and it's like, yeah, a country that was in shambles enough that like they didn't even have that like movement of equity, right? And now they are doing things that are just astonishing. That they're innovating in ways that are, I heard something about the speed at which that they, I mean, there's lots of scary things we could talk about in the pandemic world, but one of the amazing things was apparently like the speed at which they could set up hospitals was shocking.
I heard about that as well. They were doing like 2 days. They would build like an entire hospital or something. Yeah, I did hear about that. That's mental.
It's amazing. And it's like the fact that humanity can to get to that level is just so incredible, just on so many different levels.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we don't even understand what's going on over there. Like a lot of it's keeping hidden. Like who knows what technology they have. I mean, there are a billion people. It's with that many people, it's just insane what can happen in terms of innovation and technology. I think I don't think they have like a rating system as well, like a Black Mirror thing almost, where like if you misbehave, your system goes down and that allows you to get into certain areas. Or I'm not too sure. I heard rumors about that. But yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, yep, it's happening. It's happening. I certainly have my concerns there. I'm very interested in decentralization technology because, yeah, it's really something.
It is super interesting. That's where the whole blockchain comes in as well, which is you know, been a whole thing. Thing is, the hype has died down from crypto and blockchain because the stock market's gone down a bit. But I think it's very much the next 10 years is exciting for that technology.
Yes, the hype has died down for a little bit. The innovation has not. They're working at an incredible pace. So let's go into some philosophical related stuff here. So let's just open with this. Why would you make content? Why would you make a podcast where you explore ideas?
As in me, or like someone else, or like why would you?
Yeah, let's go for you. Let's go for you, and I'm happy to share mine as well.
There's a few different factors. Number one, it allows me to bring on an expert, which means it's not an egotistical podcast. It's not about me. It's about the person I'm interviewing, which means I can cover a lot of different topics, which I think are important. Number two, it's multitaskable, meaning if I want to get young people, I can't have them sitting and watching a screen for an hour. They're not going to do that. I can get them while they're at the gym, while they're in their car, while they're doing something else, and they're multitasking. So it's very consumable. They were the two main reasons. And number three was when I identified this video strategy, I realized this is a great way to leverage creating content at scale without me having to burn out and without me having to constantly come up with new ideas every single day, because I'm building businesses, I'm working on other projects as well. I'm not a full-time content creator. I don't have time to do that. So they were the kind of the three main reasons I started the podcast. And as I mentioned, when I went to this podcasting festival, it really was a great experience for me. And I met some incredible people. And probably the fourth one, which I don't know if you'd find this interesting, it is the best hack in the world to network. Like there is no other way where I can have these huge name people come spend 2 hours with me in person for free. The other day I had a guy who's running Australia's fastest crypto company. They're worth $600 million. He's 26 years old. He flew from Brisbane to Sydney. He spent 3 hours with me in my office, me and my mate. We did an interview. He then flew back home just to come spend time with me on the podcast. Imagine if I did the podcast and I had to pay him that. You'd probably pay like 10 grand or something. So they're probably the four main reasons I think why I started the podcast and why I think a lot of people will as well.
That's fantastic. So actually, could you talk a little bit about, I don't know a lot about your background besides the podcast arena and that stuff. You're working in different business arenas?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Driven Young, which is my podcast, I'm really looking to expand that. The goal for Driven Young is to be a podcast network, an educational podcast network for young people. So we have the Driven Young podcast, which is my bread and butter. I've now got the Consent and Consequences, which is my sexual assault podcast, and all around consent and all that sort of stuff, which again has done quite well. I got those two podcasts, and I'd love to expand that into have a finance podcast for young people, have a communications podcast for young people, and just build out this network of educational content that young people can learn from. And that's kind of the goal with Driven Young. I'm also working on a gap year project where I'm creating something that fits between high school and college or university, where people can party and have fun. They can get access to workshops and personal development events. They have an online community. We're building out our own social media platform for them where they can connect and just really connect and have incredible experiences throughout this year. We encourage them to travel. We're partnering with all these companies that can give virtual internships and virtual work experience and stuff. So that's a big project I'm launching in December this year. We're doing a beta trial program. And I've also got a book coming out called 18 and Lost, So Were We. And that's a book with 8 authors sharing one chapter each with a story about just everyday people sharing a story about their life, giving advice to 18-year-old. So that's coming out soon as well. And yeah, they're kind of the main things. I also help, I'm a head presenter. I've been trained up for the past 12 months to run a company called Empower You, which is like, and I don't like saying this, but it's kind of like Tony Robbins for teenagers. So it's a life skills event. It's a personal development event for teenagers. We do goal setting. We do money and finance. We do communication skills. We do emotional intelligence. We do critical thinking. And we also do a whole bunch of emotional stuff, a lot of dancing, a lot of games. And that's a weekend event. And I've been trained up for the past 12 months to start running that event as well. So yeah, I've got lots happening in terms of the young education space.
Wow, that's incredible. And yeah, Tony Robbins has gotten, I think just from how often he appears in the world, a little bit cliche, but I think that he has offered a lot to the world as well. I think that's a pretty awesome thing to be creating. So one thing I'm curious about is in your work in podcasting and having these conversations with people, how has that affected all of the other things? Have you found it building your opportunities and independence in these other areas?
Oh, absolutely. Literally everything I just mentioned came from the podcast. So a good friend of mine who I think you would really love, you should actually check him out. He's called Joe Weeby. He's got a blog and a podcast called With Joe Weeby. He talks about philosophical ideas, and he does like short podcasts, and he's just a really smart guy. He's actually one of my business partners. He talks about a concept called the 1,000 doors, which is behind one door could be potential 1,000 doors. Yet a lot of people in life only see one door and they go, I'm not going to go to the event. I don't want to go to it. But you never know what doors are behind that. And if we apply that to my life, how I met Brent. So Brent is the head, he runs Empower You. He's now my mentor and he trains me up. I do a lot of work with him. I met him through someone on the podcast who introduced me to Brent. I had Brent on the podcast. We then built a relationship. I'm now working with Empower You. Same with the Gap Year, this book project. I had Andrew, my mate. He just DM'd me randomly on Instagram. And I reached out to him and said hello. We had a chat, invited him on the podcast. 6 months later, he introduced me to Joe. Joe then runs this retreat. And in this retreat, we write a book together. And that book, that was a year ago. And we've been writing it for the past year, which now means I'm going to be a published author. And all these other things, literally everything in my life can be traced back to the podcast, which is why I mentioned networking and opportunities that come from it. So I'm a big believer that even if your podcast has 0 downloads and you have no one watching, there are going to be countless benefits for you regardless.
That's fantastic. So since you are a podcaster yourself, in a second, I want to let you ask me some questions if you want to, if you're game. Okay. But before we do that, I want to ask, so with all of that going on, that's a massive snowball, right? How are you managing that? How are you managing to stay sane? What techniques are you using here?
Well, it's kind of funny because the way my business is, and Empower You is not my business, but I do a lot of work with that, and that happens on the weekends, the weekend events. They all connect with each other, and they all it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship, as in the Driven Young podcast connects to everything else. I'm building that audience. They all connect with each other, so it's not like 3 separate projects. I also help run a company called 5:30 Club, which is where we meet at 5:30 every morning at cafes, and we've got about 30 cafes all around Australia, 30 clubs. A few hundred people, and that's another community project that I'm just passionate about. But the reason we can do this is because the rising tide lifts all boats. I have lots of people that I'm just working with. Rather than again starting my own 3 companies, I just partnered up with Brent, who runs Empower You. This Gap Year project, I'm running it with Joe. We're doing it together. Originally, it was my idea, but then I brought him on board because once you can't let your ego get in the way of these things. And he has so much to offer. So really, it's just I leverage the help of other people. And because I've got quite a good following and a bunch of listeners on the podcast, I have a lot of young people reach out to me, and they often will work for me for free, or they want to help out just to get experience and learn from us. So we have a lot of young people who are generously giving us their time. My social media is run by like 2 or 3 girls. They all do it for free because they love the podcast and want to help back. And I really appreciate that because I don't have that much money coming in right now. So yeah, I guess it's also just, I don't have like a productivity tip, honestly. It's just discipline. When you're self-employed, you've got to be disciplined. You've got to wake up on, you got to get up early. Well, I get up early because it's like setting that in that discipline, because I could sleep in all day if I wanted to, hypothetically. And no one's going to yell at me, or no one's going to tell me to do something because you're on your own boss. So I think just having a level of discipline is so crucial when it comes to managing projects and getting stuff like this done.
Have you gone through the transition yet where you've had to start saying no more than you say yes?
Yes, I actually have.
What's that like?
Yeah, because I'm such a yes guy. Jim Carrey, that movie Yes Man, that was me. Like, I say yes to everything because of the thousand doors mentality. To the point where I would often have Zooms with my listeners because I want to build that relationship and I find that valuable, to the point where I was just like, it's just taking up too much time. And I would send them a 30-minute link, calendar link, and I do like 30-minute chats with them, which is great, but it was getting to the point where I would offer it way too generously. I would just constantly give it out, this calendar link, and I was constantly doing meetings and doing this stuff. And I was like, you know what? I cut that down to 15 minutes, and now I don't really do it unless people specifically ask to chat with me, and that's been a big saver. And then also just, people have to come on the show or opportunities come up, and I have to say no because I'm busy and I don't want to compromise the other opportunities because I'm taking on too much. But that was a really difficult thing for me to get over. Like, I hate saying no to people. I hate it.
Can I ask what's the struggle now, and what's your next direction to push you forwards?
I mean, the literal struggle right now is we're in lockdown, so I can't really leave my house, which is frustrating. EmpowerU's been shut down, which is the events company, because we can't run that. So I guess it's just like, we're not sure when this is going to end. We're not sure how long this COVID thing is going to last in Australia. Our vaccination rates are really low. So that's the real big struggle right now. Just the future's a bit unclear. And a lot of the stuff I want to do revolves around in person. And all my podcasts are in person. So it's just kind of like, what's the vision there? The biggest thing kind of holding me back right now is I just need to monetize it. And I do have sponsors coming through, but it's a bit of a slow burn getting these bigger name sponsors on. So my biggest thing is I just need money coming in, because once I get more money coming in, I can then employ someone full time, and that can take a lot of the workload off me. And I think the next phase for me is really outsourcing, really delegating and outsourcing, like to the next level.
Well, I think you're killing it, man. You're moving in a very efficient and, as you said, systematized manner, which, I mean, the dividends that pays down the road is incredible. I'm finding myself having this conversation over and over again with folks that are like starting to get the following, and now from what's happening with you is like, you can't conceive of the value that it has down the road. Right? Like it's not like a stock market graph, right? Where you can plan out, okay, I've got 4% compound interest on my investment returns, and I know what that's going to be 30 years from now, or I got an approximation. It's nothing like that. It's you communicate with people, you build a network, and then out of that comes mysterious, fascinating things. And it sounds like you've touched on some of those. I mean, how much of the things that you've had happen recently with these different endeavors that you're doing, how many of them, like, would you have known that was the exact direction? Was this all grand plan, or was it like I'm sure that there were elements of it that were planned. We always put some plan in place, but like, are some of these like, wow, like, this is not necessarily where it would have gone, but cool? Or was it grand plan?
Absolutely. Like, I love not knowing where I'm going to be in 12 months. I love that level of, what's the word? Variety. Yeah, I love that. Have you heard Tony Robbins' 6 Human Needs?
Yes, love it.
Yeah. So the first two is number one is variety, and number two is I've just had a blank.
Uncertainty and certainty.
Yeah, sorry. Certainty and uncertainty, or certainty and variety, whatever word you want to use. They're the first two, right? So it's like having variety in terms of every 12 months, I got no idea where I'm going to be. And to answer your question, yeah, look, some of it's been like the growth of the podcast was planned and hoped. TikTok content has been planned and hoped, but starting this sexual assault podcast completely happened sporadically. I didn't plan that. And then off the back of that going, maybe I should turn this into a podcast network. Once again, sporadic. And it's funny because my most recent episode I released is one of my all-time favorites. It's with a quadruple amputee, and he's unbelievably intelligent. Like when you listen to him speak, and we spoke about how like a lot of the time you can't even fathom what your opportunity cost could be because your brain can't even think about what it could be. If you had said, like, let's say I went to uni instead of doing the podcast. If I was at uni, I never would have gone, I'd probably be saying in my head, I'm glad I went to uni because I'm getting a lot out of it. But I never would have imagined that I could be doing a podcast and growing all these other companies and doing this as well. So I think that's where you go, what is the best version of yourself you could be? And like, you know, other timelines where someone's more, you know, doing something that I'd love or something else. And you never know. And I feel like I'm living the best one, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I can't even imagine what I could be doing instead. And so, yeah, it's structured with a lot of freedom involved. Like I set my goals at the beginning of the year. I had certain goals. Some of them are redundant now. And then some of them I didn't even imagine would happen. And I love that variety. But I love the certainty of, you know, a day-to-day routine. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's a critical part. That's why, like, even when you're looking at like getting investment and you're like, you've got to show to them like your 5-year plan. I'm like, how do I even show you my 5-year? I don't know what my 5-year plan is. Like, I don't know who I'm going to meet. I don't know what's going to happen. I have a rough plan I can give you, a rough idea, but who knows what's going to happen? And I kind of love that.
Yeah, it's consistent small work on, or consistent large work, which is what you've done. Consistent work on connection and communication and network.
Well, network is everything. Like that's where almost all my opportunities have come from, people and network. And that's why I can't predict where I'm going to be in 12 months because I don't know who I'm going to meet and I don't know what opportunities are going to come from that.
It's incredible. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I guess, I mean, your listeners probably already know your story, but like, what's your experience been with TikTok and online content? I'd love to know, you know, why did you even start? What was the reasoning behind that? And how did you find your, I guess, style? Because I haven't seen anyone do your style. It's very unique and really interesting.
It's been life-changing. It's incredible what's happened. I would say that the content that I'm creating happened, like the style that came about happened from giving up. So I made content for years. I'm an artist, I'm a musician, so like creative stuff online was just sort of like, well, of course you're gonna do this. So I made all sorts of videos for years. Nothing ever took off, and I take full credit for it being crap. And it's, you know, it was mostly, I think, because of the perfectionism and, you know, artistic lockdown that I had myself in. But I went through a period of life where I was slowly getting things together, and one of the resounding choruses, the thing that kept coming back was, what can you do? Because a lot of my struggles in life came from, let's say, having a very large dream and not living up to it and feeling bad about that, and then not being willing to do the small work that would even move me towards that large dream.
Do you think it was your expectations were too high?
So whenever I talk about this, I want to be clear. Like, I think people can have high expectations. You just can't live in them, right? So it's like, it's one thing to want to be a rock star or an actor or, you know, a business mogul. It's another thing to live in the dream, and then when you look at your own life, be angry at it and resentful and not willing to live inside of your own life. And I excuse me, and I had a little bit of that. I had a lot of it.
Can I just add something real quick? Sorry. I think that is what a lot of young people are suffering from nowadays, thanks to social media. And because we can see everyone's perfect lifestyles, we're often living in their lifestyle and that expectation rather than our own lives, which is causing this pandemic of mental health, anxiety, comparing ourselves to other people, which honestly breaks my heart.
Yeah, so the quick analogy for this that I use is like, think of your dreams as a North Star. So if you think about how a traveler operates, well, the traveler looks up at the North Star and uses it for navigation. If what happens if I mean, and then the traveler looks down at the path and then goes for a walk, and then looks up 10 miles later and checks in. What happens if the traveler stares at the North Star and walks on the path? Well, they walk off a cliff. The path curves and they just walk right off. And I feel like that is a good analogy for what it's like to get obsessed with, you know, the things that you want. And to like you think you're chasing them, but in reality you're ignoring the fundamental aspects of your life. So that was kind of the big thing that hit me when I was at a low point in my life. And that became kind of the way I got out of it was this idea of like, okay, what can you do right now? You know, it was very simple things of like, you know, put a couple extra dollars this month on student debt, you know, that kind of like really simple stuff. And I went through a period where I kind of got things together and my life started clicking. And, you know, I was like, okay, this is life. This is actually, you know, maybe it's not the big dream that I wanted, but this is actually, I manufactured something where like I can live a decent life. And, you know, I'm doing what I choose to do and it's getting better over time. It's like, that's pretty damn good. And, sometime around that point, I had my finances under control and I was, as a result, looking into more finance related stuff. And, I came across something that I was like, well, this is dumb. And I was like, I want to make a video about this. And this is the part that mattered, was when I went to make the video, I had a bunch of realizations in series where I went, okay, I've tried to make content. I've wanted to make thought content before. I've tried to make content looking at a camera, and I stutter. Well, I've been trying to fix this for years. Like, I'm camera shy. Like, what if I just don't fix it? And I just said, okay, so I won't look at the camera. And then I was like, I'm terrible at memorization. This has been a lifelong struggle for me. I can't remember any of the birthdays of like anyone I know. I keep them on my calendar. I can't. It's not the thing that I'm built for. I always say that like I'm terrible at math. I know what to do with math. I'm a very conceptually based person. And so I just wrote it out on a script and I read it off. And it was a series of things that I gave up on that enabled me to actually communicate the thought that I wanted to communicate. And the very first thing went viral.
Your first video went viral.
The first video like that. The first video where I gave up on all of the things that I was bad at.
What a great reference.
Yeah, it was an incredible like knock on the head of like, hey, look, it's like, do the things you can do.
The reason I love that is because, and this is a great thing about TikTok, is really nothing matters except for your content and what you're saying. You could have the worst quality, you could have bad lighting, and that's sure, it might not help you, but if you've got good content, there's a high chance your video can go viral.
Yes. So this is the thing that I was kind of leaning towards earlier when we were talking about like pushing through a weakness or moving around a weakness. This has had such an impact on my life. So like whenever anybody like brings this up or asks about it, like I really encourage people to lean on their strengths. Not because it's not a good exercise to strengthen your weaknesses, but because you have infinite weaknesses and finite strengths. Like that's just the way it is. There are infinite ways in which you can die, and there are finite ways in which you can live. That's just the way it is. And like, I mean, yes, you can find infinite variation inside of that life, but like there are certain things that you can do, and then infinite things that you cannot do. So if that's the case, you can get lost in the things that you cannot do. But if you move towards the things that you can do, and then as an occasional exercise, work on something that you're weak on to, develop that discipline, strengthen you, and widen your boundaries and horizon, like, great. But like, you lean on those strengths, and I really believe, I mean, okay, maybe the first video doesn't go viral. That might have been, freak luck, whatever. But like, I really believe that going in that direction is a way to move forwards in, I think, all elements of life. I can't think of an element of life where that doesn't apply.
Oh, I completely agree. And it's like, you can almost take that analogy and say you can either focus on your positives or focus on the negatives. And so many people in the world choose to focus on the negative stuff. And it's the same thing. You can either focus on all the infinite weaknesses you have, or you can look, well, actually, I'm strong at one or two things. Let's put my time and effort into those things. And so for you, your weakness, you can't look down the barrel of the camera. You can't memorize stuff. Well, what am I good at? I'm good at the content. So let's just write a really good script and read it and see what happens. And I think that's such a great, and it's really just taking that first step, isn't it? It's just, how do you achieve a goal? It's just a habit compounded over time. You've just got to go one step at a time. Whereas, as you mentioned, people are constantly looking at the North Star. They're going, I want to get there, I want to get there, I want to get there. How do you get there? Look down at the ground and take a step, and then another, and then another.
Yes, and I want to point out that, like, as I speak to you, I'm looking straight at a camera, right? So, and this is another thing I try to make a point of is, look, like, we sometimes think that these barriers and hangups are things that, like, we have to get through now. But sometimes when you lean on a strength, you look back at the thing that you're struggling with 6 months later, and it's just the easiest thing in the world. Or it's either the easiest thing in the world, like it's an easy thing for you to work through, or you realize, oh, that, like, I never needed to work through that. I could just have done something else. And it's like, only moving forwards and progressing is something that allows that realization to happen. So it's like, okay, this was like a problem for me before. And, but it's like, doing the work in other realms enabled me to do the things that I struggled with previously. So yeah, I think it's a really, really valuable thing. So yeah, I just I think what you're doing is amazing. I think you've gotten incredibly productive, and I really admire that. I guess we should just close off with what are you working on specifically now that you want people to check out, and where do you want to send people, and any last thoughts?
I mean, I've got a lot of things happening right now. So I guess if you are a young person, or if you have a young person in your life, a sibling or whatever, I guess Driven Young podcast. So it's just Driven Young. If you go to my Instagram or my TikTok, which is Byron Dempsey, the link in the bio has all the links you need, just like everyone else. But yeah, I've got this upcoming Gap Year project. And the cool thing about the Gap Year project that we realized was, we were like, we're going to run it in Sydney, right? But that doesn't mean it has to be just Sydney people. Like, if once this project gets off, you could be in America and be like, I want to take a gap year. I'm going to fly to Australia and do the program in Sydney. Like, that is so cool. So we kind of realized this can be an immediate international thing. So if you're feeling a bit lost in life as a young person, feel free to check out that, stay in touch. We've got the book coming out, 18 are Lost. So are we. Yeah, that's what it's called. So that's all. If you just follow me along on Instagram, you'll see everything there, which is just Byron__Dempsey. But yeah, I think, what would be the main message of this podcast? It's probably in a few. I think maybe just take the step, start now, just one step at a time. And we didn't even get into the whole conversation of judgment of others, which is a whole thing with TikTok, just getting past that barrier. But yeah, this has been really fun. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this.